Thank you, Rajalakshmi. And um, today we are going to talk about breathlessness and cough. Uh, this is one of the common symptoms that is seen not only in patients with cancer, but also in many other diseases. Uh, and if you have experienced breathlessness once, then you will know how much it will impact you. The uh, the problems or the impact of the breathlessness is not only to the patient but also to the caregivers and also to the including professional caregivers. Um, we should understand what are the basics of assessing a patient with breathlessness. And Dr. Rajam, who is a pulmonologist by profession, but she is trying to integrate palliative care into her practice. And she belongs to the rarest group as she's a pulmonologist and trying to integrate palliative care into her practice. And she has been working in palliative care for a couple of years. And she's the consultant pulmonologist at two hospitals in Mumbai and has been practicing palliative care as well. So I understand that you had some emergency in between, and but you were able to join us. Happy to see you here and welcome you.
Doctor, you're muted.
You are muted.
Can you unmute from your end?
Sorry. So good afternoon, everybody. My name is Rajam. The emergency was such that I was just rushing to get vaccines for my staff. So that's the reason the vaccination center took a bit of time. So I wasn't sure if I would join all of you on time, but I'm glad to be here. Just a few questions before I start, Sunil. So this batch has had a training in palliative care for a while now. This is which talk for them.
Yeah, communication, pain, and introduction to palliative care and ethics has been finished.
Okay, fine. Okay, so that means amongst the non cancer, this is the first talk. Is that right?
Rajlakshmi, did we finish non-cancer?
Yes, sir. And we also completed gastrointestinal symptoms.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay, fine. Okay, fine. So as Sunil has mentioned that I am a pulmonologist and I am from Bombay. I will start with sharing my screen, but I also request this time of the afternoon is very difficult to stay focused on a lecture and especially when it is virtual. So I encourage you all to please keep the chat box active. Sunil and me will alternately look at the chat box. We can please interrupt in the middle if you do not understand. Let's make it as interactive so that it can become interesting. Every time I take such a lecture, I also end up learning from the participants, and I think it has to be a shared knowledge. So please feel free to use the chat box, and in the end, if there are any difficult questions or questions which are a little complex to type and understand, we can have a discussion before we proceed for the case presentation. So, without taking more time, I'm going to share my screen, and we are today going to talk about the the need for palliative care in patients with respiratory symptoms or in respiratory medicine. So to begin with, what I wanted to actually highlight was something probably you all would have heard, and that is that palliative care historically started as something to comfort patients with advanced cancers and those patients who have probably incurable terminal cancers. So, historically in Europe, that is how palliative care began. And unfortunately, our medical training does not focus on palliative care at all. And even healthcare professionals, nurses, doctors, and everybody working in a hospital or in healthcare still there are a big percentage of people who believe that palliative care is meant for cancer patients only, and palliative care is only at end of life, and palliative care is giving up, which means just losing hope on the patients. In fact, it's exactly the opposite. And during the course of the lecture, we will tell you why is it important to understand the need for palliative care in respiratory medicine. So today we will go through these four essential topics. And like Sunil said, we will focus on breathlessness because it is one of the main symptoms which patients with respiratory disease experience. We will also introduce you to the concept of chronic breathlessness syndrome and how to recognize it, and also how to treat it, the role of morphine in patients who are chronically breathless, and just go through other respiratory symptoms. So if you look at one of these charts, which this is actually published in 2017, I'm sure there is a later percentage which I really need to update my slides with. But if you see this picture, you will realize that every year India adds about 1 million new patients of cancer. But if you see the top of this table, almost 45% of Indians are affected by lifestyle diseases like respiratory, TB, diabetes, heart disease, stroke. So if you add all these things up, including tuberculosis, there's a large chunk of Indians who are affected by these chronic lifestyle illnesses. Now, if you take a moment of your time and think, how many diseases are we able to cure? If you can put it in the chat box, as a doctor, in all your years of experience, just think of how many illnesses you have been able to cure, how many do you control, and how, even if it's a rough percentage, it is fine. And how many are you actually able to say that there is no cure for this? So, thinking about that and thinking about the integration of palliative care into any system, we realize that we probably cure only infections to 100%. So, we are able to fully cure infections. Lifestyle diseases like diabetes, heart, COPD, asthma, lipids, these we are able to control. We are not able to cure. And the other rest of the one third, like probably some autoimmune diseases, certain types of cancers, interstitial lung diseases, certain kinds of renal disease like CKD, we are only able, it is only incurable, correct? We are not able to completely cure it. So, therefore, we realize that though we do add a lot of cancers every year, there are other conditions which also demand the respect of um palliative care. Very, very important to remember that these patients who are non-cancer, they actually end up suffering from their conditions for a prolonged period of time with high symptom burden. So a COPD gets diagnosed at the age of 65. He probably dies at 80. From 65 to 80, he is living every day with an incurable illness. So please remember that we are able to only treat one third of the conditions. And if you think of respiratory diseases in India, we form the population of India is 18% of the world's population. But when it comes to chronic respiratory illness, we actually have 32% of the world's burden of chronic respiratory diseases, which means every third person in the world who is suffering from a chronic respiratory illness is an Indian. And of course, the COVID pandemic has also made it much, much worse. You know, now we have the largest number of people suffering with COVID. And unfortunately, COVID also leaves behind a long tail of people who are suffering from chronic respiratory conditions. So please do remember that we are a big chunk of respiratory illnesses in the country. And because we are slowly becoming an aging population, what is the meaning of aging? Aging, especially when we say that by the year of 2050, the number of 60-year-olds and the number of 80-year-olds in the country are going to go up tremendously by 300 and 700% respectively. So we'll have a very gray nation. And you know that when you have an elderly nation, the problems are only going to increase. The chronic illnesses are only going to become more, and we are going to deal with a lot of people who are going to be in that age group. So coming to breathlessness, which is one of the most important and most commonly faced symptom of most patients of respiratory illness. But we must also remember that also non-respiratory patients also complain of breathlessness. So we will see the causes. Just to give you the magnitude of the problem, 75 million people worldwide suffer breathlessness annually, of which the majority of the causes is respiratory, 50% is due to incurable cancers, and the rest is because of the heart disease. And so, what are the causes of cancer? Breathlessness. So, one is, if you think of the respiratory system, it is airways. So, all airway diseases like chronic obstructive lung disease, asthma, bronchiectasis, parenchyma, interstitial lung disease, and the innumerable causes of interstitial lung. Vascular, pulmonary embolism, pulmonary artery hypertension, they also can cause breathlessness. Then you have pleural, so mediastinal effusion, pleural effusion, pneumothorax. So in any time when you're asked to think of causes for breathlessness, especially in respiratory diseases, you can divide it into airway, vascular, mediastinal, parenchymal, and you will get at least two, three causes of each. But besides this, you must remember that advanced heart disease also can make a patient breathless. Neurological conditions, especially those which result in muscular degeneration, like motor neuron disease, like pump failure, like, say, for example, even conditions like a stroke, they also can affect the breathing. So please remember, when you have a patient who is breathless, it is not just the lung. You need to keep your eyes, ears open for the history of that patient so that you can get more out of the patient. And uh, what is most important to actually think about is that this diagram, I'm not sure whether all of you have seen this chart before. So if you think of all the people in the world who die, you can roughly classify them into these four graphs. Now if you see graph number 1, this is those number of people who die suddenly, and the worst part is that only less than 7% of the world's population have a sudden death, which means only 7 out of 10 people, 7% are going to die suddenly. The rest of the 90 odd will go through a bed bound phase. And that is one of the curses of modern medicine. And how are the rest divided? One, the term graph B is terminal illness, which means something like a cancer, where they enjoy a good quality life and they slowly start dipping. And this is the phase where probably palliative care is integrated. But today, what we are going to talk about is organ failure. And you can think of liver, kidney, heart, lung, all of this will fit into this organ failure. And what does this graph C show? It shows that when a person is diagnosed to have an illness, each of this dip is an acute exacerbation. Each of this illness worsens his quality of life. He never comes back to the original quality of life. And like I told you, people suffering from organ failure live a prolonged period of time, a lot of years, with high symptom burden, poor quality life, and deteriorating quality of life. And if you also see the last graph, this is frailty. So elderly population, dementia, they slowly wither away. There's nothing really wrong with them, but they slowly, one by one, and they can live a very prolonged period of time. And therefore, you realize that graph C and graph D also require palliative care because it's a prolonged period of time. And these are conditions which are incurable. Plus, imagine a person and a family who's looking after this one patient. The entire family goes through so much stress with repeated hospitalization, repeated medications, physiotherapy, pulmonary rehab, vaccination. So many things are going on in this family. So, definitely, the whole idea of showing you these graphs is to highlight and impress upon you that non cancer or non-communicable diseases also require integrated palliative care because they do suffer a very high symptom burden. Also, when you diagnose a patient to have lung cancer and when you diagnose a patient to have COPD, the COPD patient doesn't perceive it to be life limiting. But if you tell a patient it's a cancer diagnosis, he's automatically thinking in his brain, how much time do I have to live? But if you diagnose a patient who have smoking related lung disease, he feels his pulmonologist is treating him with inhalers. So he's going to be fine. None of the pulmonologists or doctors are trained to communicate well to this patient that this illness is incurable, it is progressive, and I'm only giving you symptomatic treatment. So coming to the types of breathlessness, the way we assess them: acute, acute on chronic, and chronic. And acute on chronic as well as chronic is the purview of palliative care, because acute breathlessness in a patient who has absolutely no issues will obviously go into aggressive investigations and treatment. It's only after being labeled with an illness which is incurable that the patient will have chronic breathlessness or acute on chronic. And the scales we use to assess breathlessness is the New York Heart Association and the Modified Medical Research Council. BOG scale is another scale that can be used to assess breathlessness, especially during certain tests like the 6-minute walk test. So this all, I'm sure all of you are aware of it. I do not have to go that the cardiologists define or categorize breathlessness based on class 1 to class 4, while the respiratory physicians do this grade based on grades, and it's grade 0 to grade 4 being the worst, where the patient is bedbound and housebound. Whenever you have a patient of breathlessness, you need to go through this basic list of investigations, which is of course a detailed history, examination. You need to do a chest x-ray, ECG, a pulmonary function test, 2D echo, CT scan, and an arterial blood gas. Please remember that all causes of breathlessness is not the lung only. You must think of other causes, including anxiety, because anxiety can worsen the breathlessness. Now, when we are taught about breathlessness in medical college, we are taught about onset, duration, progress, what actually improves the breathlessness, what decreases the breathlessness, and we think about signs, etc. When you have a patient of chronic breathlessness, so for example, when you have a patient who is diagnosed COPD, 10 years into the diagnosis of COPD, and he continues to feel breathless, there's hardly any amount of lung participating in respiration, that patient, when he experiences breathlessness every minute of his life, every hour of the day, every day of the week, for 365 days, we need to think of what issues that patient will have. So if he's bedbound, if he's housebound, if he's oxygen bound, there are a lot of things in his life which will change. So we really need to start thinking about how this patient feels. So this patient will have extreme amount of dependence on the activities of daily living. For example, he might not be able to go to a bathroom alone. He might not be able to wash himself. He might not be able to talk. He might not be able to walk and eat meals with his family. So it's definitely activities of daily living is he becomes increasingly dependent. At one point, this person was actually being the head of the family and had a role in the family, and there's suddenly a loss of role and he's completely dependent. Also, he's segregated from other friends because he's not able to go out. His friends are also old, so there is social isolation. And very often in the West, when they live alone, these elderly, they actually described a social death before a physical one. And therefore, this leads to frustration, anger, depression. Why should I live? What is the purpose of this life? I can't even do small things by myself. I'm not even so independent. Therefore, it sets off the anxiety and the fear of death. So, this is described very beautifully in this model, which is the thinking, breathing, functioning model. Now, if you imagine a patient of COPD, so for to imagine a patient of COPD, I would like all of you to do a bit of an exercise. So, if you can sit comfortably, sorry, wherever you all are, take a deep breath in and breathe out only half. After you breathe out half, take another breath in and breathe half. And then you realize how a patient of COPD actually feels, because his breath is never complete. And that's how he feels. So if you take 2 minutes or 2 seconds actually, if you keep expiring half of the amount you have inspired and the next breath becomes smaller and smaller and smaller, that is how our patients of COPD feel. They are so choked up and they're so breathless. Imagine living like that for 24 hours in a day. What happens? They start thinking of the worst. They start thinking of dying. Their muscles of respiration is working extra. Their respiratory rate is increasing. They're panicking. They're anxious. They're going to go on to the hospital or go to the ICU. And therefore, they start overthinking and they become so anxious. This leads to them not even walking the little bit they are used to, because they get more and more deconditioned. So, a very breathless patient is anxious, does not walk, gets more breathless, more anxious, more deconditioned, and most of our patients with advanced respiratory conditions are stuck in this vicious cycle of this breathing, thinking, functioning model. And this is exactly where a multidisciplinary palliative care team actually helps in rehabilitating this patient. We cannot give them new lungs. We cannot make the COPD disappear. What can we do? We can give them appropriate medications to control the breathing. We can start counseling to decrease their anxiety. We can start physiotherapy to make them use whatever muscle and lung capacity they have. So it's a multi pronged effort and involve the caregivers, counsel the caregivers so that the patient feels supported and non abandoned. And this multidisciplinary approach helps us break this vicious cycle so that even if you're not able to cure, at least we are able to make the patient a bit more better with better quality of life. Quantity of life is something we don't have control about. But as doctors, even if we cannot cure, it is our duty to comfort and care. And there is lots we can do to make the patient feel better, even with such an advanced lung disease. So that brings us to the point of what is chronic breathlessness syndrome. So this was actually defined and published in 2017, and it is defined as a condition where a person is continuously breathless despite being on optimum therapy for his underlying pathophysiology, and this affects his psychosocial, spiritual, and social life. So, very often, one of the questions you can ask your patients with advanced respiratory conditions is, how is your life changed? Are you coping with this breathlessness? See, these are the questions which will actually elicit the kind of answers as to how this breathlessness is affecting that particular patient. So please remember that chronic breathlessness syndrome is an entity where you have patients with advanced lung disease, advanced heart disease, advanced neuromuscular conditions, where all treatment is going on for a decent duration of time, and yet your patient is constantly breathless, either at rest or minimal activity. So, how do you treat these patients of advanced COPD? There's very often patients are told, we are not able to do much. This is all that we can do. But please remember that we have a lot that we can offer and help the patient even with the support of the caregivers. So, how can we do this? So, first of all, is non pharmacological. And non pharmacological plays a very, very vital role, simply because you can actually start asking the patients for exploring the fears, getting a counselor on board, simple relaxation techniques, breathing techniques with a physiotherapist, and asking the patient to attain a particular position he's comfortable with, plus some wearing loose clothes. And one of the evidence that has been published very significant is blowing a fan on the face. For a very breathless patient, if you blow a fan on the face, there is a relief of dyspnea. The sensation of breathlessness becomes less. And there, this is also important because if we cannot treat the cause, at least we can make him feel better. And amongst the pharmacological causes, I'm sure all of you know this, I don't have to go through it: the bronchodilators, steroids, nebulizer, antibiotics, antifibrotics in interstitial lung disease, and also BiPAP and non invasive ventilation. So please do remember that even oxygen comes under pharmacology. Please use oxygen only when the patient is hypoxic. And that is, if the patient's oxygen levels are below 88, is when you need to use oxygen. In the COVID era, everybody is so obsessed with pulse ox. Everybody is measuring their oximeter. You do not need oxygen if the saturation is above 88. Because please remember that oxygen is also a drug. Excess oxygen given unnecessarily also causes problems. It releases nascent oxygen and therefore it can damage the lungs. And now we have seen the high flow nasal oxygen along with steroids, unfortunately, in COVID patients have resulted in this mucor or black fungus. So please use oxygen judiciously, especially when we've had so much of oxygen deficiency also in the country where people have died due to lack of oxygen. So please don't waste a very important drug, which is oxygen. Now, coming to the pharmacological treatment of chronic breathlessness, that is morphine. And when I started my journey in palliative care, I was also shocked about morphine in breathlessness. One has only heard about morphine in cancer pain. It is important to realize that morphine given in low, safe doses is highly effective and a wonder drug for those patients who really are at the end of the road with their breathlessness and their advanced lung disease. So, what does morphine do? It decreases the sensation of breathlessness, it decreases the work of breathing, it slows down the respiratory rate, and therefore the patient feels less breathless. It doesn't do anything to the lung parenchyma or the pathophysiology of breathlessness. We start really low and go slow, which is the mantra of palliative care, and titrate the dose very gradually. In fact, we start at as low dose as 2.5 milligrams twice a day and slowly increase it. We also must remember to prescribe morphine with a laxative. You cannot afford patients with with persistent chronic breathlessness to get constipated. Patients must be given a laxative so that they can pass one stool without any trouble. So this is the chart. You will all get this slides, not a problem. How we start morphine, how if we are giving an intravenous dose, we decrease the dose of morphine. Morphine can be given safely orally as well as subcutaneously. Most of my patients are taking oral morphine at home. So you give them, we get only intermediate release in Bombay. So we give them intermediate release morphine, gradually titrated, not more than 30 milligrams in a day. Very few of my patients are more than 20 milligrams, but you can start really slow doses along with non pharmacological treatments. And if you feel the patient is more anxious, then you can add medium acting benzodiazepines. If there's a panic attack, you can combine morphine with midazolam. So, my whole take home message is that morphine used in low doses is extremely safe in patients who are breathless. It does not cause type 2 respiratory failure. It does not cause respiratory depression. The intent is to comfort the patient. And there is a lot of opioid phobia amongst physicians, amongst patients, and caregivers. Often they say, I don't have cancer, I don't have pain, I'm not going to die. Why are you giving me morphine? Am I going to get addicted to it? So, when given in right indications, morphine does not cause addiction because it attaches itself to the mu receptor. So it does not cause, when taken unindicated, yes, it can cause addiction. And there's enough robust evidence to suggest that it is very, very effective in patients who are chronically breathless. It does not, like I said, cause respiratory depression or type 2 respiratory failure. Again, I must talk about terminal breathlessness. I just want to check the time. Okay. So I have about 7, 8 minutes. So I want to talk to you about terminal breathlessness. This is when the patient is just about to die. Almost 90% patients experience the breathlessness towards end of life or when they're actively dying, whatever cause of the breathlessness may be. And it is important for us as doctors to make the patient comfortable so that he can transition in dignity and respect. At the same time, as Dame Cicely Saunders has mentioned, the memory or the manner in which you lose a loved one is etched in the memory of those who live on. So, those people who are going to continue to live will constantly hound them how their loved one passed away. So, it's our moral responsibility to see to it that patients remain comfortable at all times, even if it's just before death. And for that, a combination of morphine and midazolam given subcutaneously over 24 hours really makes the patient calm. Please note that the intent is comfort, intent is addressing symptoms, and the intent is giving the patient dignity and respect. But Before you do all this, it is extremely important to communicate with the patient much before he reaches this stage, convince and take the documentation and signature from the caregivers, because the patient will be sedated and the patient will be non-responsive. So they should not say, you gave this injection and look what happened to the patient. So you have to communicate properly. You have to take the necessary signatures, and you start this combination of 10 milligrams midazolam and 10 milligrams morphine slowly in 24 hours, given subcutaneously, because it's another preferred route of administration in patients who are in palliative care. It's the least painful. I'm sure you will learn more about subcutaneous route of administration and other routes like per oral, buccal, per rectal, transdermal. These are the more painless ways of delivering medications to comfort the patients in palliative care. So this is just a rough idea to tell you that palliative care is not, sorry, palliative sedation or treatment of terminal breathlessness with round the clock morphine and midazolam is not euthanasia. It is not an intent act to kill the patient. The intent is to comfort the patient, and that is reflected by the doses of the medications we give. It is really the smallest dose and given over 24 hours. Any questions so far? Am I going too fast? There are a few questions, I think, Sunil.
Yeah, there is one question that was if the patient doesn't have the facility for 2D echo or HRCT
Yeah,
in rural
fair
setting, what
enough.
can we do? Yeah.
What you can do is simple. You can all have a peak flow meter. I don't know how many of you know what is a peak flow meter, but it's also called a breathometer. So this actually gives you a rough analysis of the airways. So if you look up breathefree.com, I'm sending you if you look up this website, you'll know all about the peak flow meter. And it's a great way to assess the lung function of a patient just bedside. And it is not even 300 rupees or 500 rupees. So doctors can keep it. They can ask their patients to buy it if the patient has airway diseases. Now, if you do not have a 2D echo or an HRCT, it's fine. It is not that you have to do it every time. For first time, to reach a diagnosis you need it, and then you have to evaluate every 12 to 18 months. So it's not that every time the patient comes, and I think the HRCT is really being abused in the COVID-19 pandemic. Too many CT scans are being ordered, which is really not necessary. Not much CT appearances will change within 4 days to 1 week. So we should not be ordering so many CT scans. So it's perfectly all right if you're not able to do CT. You don't need it often. You just need it once in 2 years, and that can be arranged with a local nearby town or city. Okay. So going ahead, I'm just going to go through certain other common respiratory symptoms like secretions. Very often you see patients not just with respiratory system, but also with stroke and neurological problems, bulbar palsies, progressive supranuclear palsy, etc., who have secretions. And very often there's a suction machine next to it, and the nurse or the caregiver is desperately trying to suction the awake patient. It's a horrible, horrible feeling. Imagine you are awake with your eyes open and somebody shoving that rubber tube down your throat and suctioning it. It is such an uncomfortable feeling, and the poor pharynx is battered with ulcers. So, in a patient who's a palliative care approach or a post stroke patient, instead of doing this, you should aggressively use certain things like position change or like chest physiotherapy, chest percussion. But the best way is also to decrease the secretions. So please remember, if the secretions are a problem, you should use medications like glycopyrrolate, as well as hyoscine, which is our buscopan, to decrease the secretions. So use it judiciously, use it on need basis. Don't make the patient too dry. So all the pharmacological details will be available to you. But remember of hyoscine and glycopyrrolate to decrease the secretions. Please don't try and avoid suction, especially down to the pharynx for these patients. It's extremely uncomfortable. Okay. So I think there are a couple of more questions. Should morphine be used in severe COVID? So can we take these questions towards the end? Sunil, will you please remember?
Yeah.
Okay.
Right.
Yeah. 3 questions are there up till now. Great. So we'll just go through the other symptoms like cough. Again, it is a normal protective reflux, which is important to prevent foreign bodies entering the lung. Having said that, when it becomes persistent, when it becomes chronic, it can become very difficult for the patient. It also hampers his daily life, sleep. It can cause hernias, fractures, syncope. And so, therefore, you need to realize that incessant, persistent cough must be treated. And it's not, again, just a respiratory condition. It can be because of the heart, it can be because of ENT, it can be gastric reflux, it can be drugs, it can be treatment like radiation, and also an element of psychogenic cough is also seen. So again, it all depends on the kind of cough, whether it is productive cough, postural cough. So depending on the diagnosis. But there are certain times, for example, patients with post-radiation or interstitial lung disease who constantly have cough. So these patients, you should again focus on non-pharmacological, like certain breathing techniques, diet measurements, eating early, some kind of physical activity. All these things need to be incorporated. After which, if the patient continues to struggle with cough, you can start with topical things, for example, like lozenges, hot water gargles, codeine syrup, and then move on to something like uh, maybe dextromethorphan. And the next step which we use is morphine. Again, like how we used for respiratory breathlessness, we can use for persistent cough if everything else has been tried. And the other very interesting medication which is tried is gabapentin. There are papers now that are published that 100 milligrams of gabapentin to start at with night, increase to 300 or 600 milligrams in a day, you can get good relief from cough. But please remember that gabapentin is expensive, and two, that gabapentin also causes a lot of drowsiness. So give it to patients who can manage that drowsiness and not who are active or on their own, because we don't want them to be falling. So please remember, again, anytime you assess cough, which is again a very common symptom in an OPD, you should have a detailed history, evaluate the patient, reach your diagnosis, and only then start first the treatment, common things common, and once it reaches the chronic phase, only then you incorporate all these things. So we again use these are the drugs I told you: codeine, morphine, gabapentin. You can use for patients with intractable cough. So I will just run through all these other things. Pleural effusion, again commonly seen in malignant settings. Recurrently filling becomes very distressing. The management for that typically depends on the prognosis of the patient. So if the patient's prognosis is very good, we actually can put a pigtail so that the fluid gets drained and the patient doesn't have to keep coming to the hospital. But if the patient does not have good prognosis, then we do a one-time aspiration and we try and settle the patient at home itself with symptomatic treatment. And for patients who have good prognosis, we can also think of procedures like pleurodesis, where we obliterate the space between the two pleural surfaces by putting talc, which is sterile talc, so that it causes an intense inflammation and adherence of the two surfaces of the pleura. So, like I said, the management depends on the severity, and we either drain it one time or we put a pigtail so that the patient is comfortable. Hemoptysis is one of the last things that I want to talk about. Again, people die of loss of blood or drowning in their own secretions. In India, it is common because of tuberculosis and also, of course, lung cancer, being on blood thinners, etc. Trauma can also cause hemoptysis. So the most important thing in hemoptysis, especially a large hemoptysis, probably the patient doesn't even give you time, but a large, for example, massive hemoptysis, anything more than 100 to 150 ml at one time, you need to reassure the patient. You need to use dark towel so that the white towel and blood doesn't scare the patient. And you can also use tranexamic acid. There are certain procedures that you can use, like endobronchial adrenaline, or you can do brachytherapy, laser, cryo, and bronchial artery embolization can be done. These are, of course, in big hospital settings. So these are important. Like I said, tranexamic acid can be used. It can be used in injectables. It can also be used endobronchially to stop the bleeding. The last is hiccups. Again, you know, it's because mainly because of acidity, and you can use these medications, which is basically antiflatulent, prokinetics, and you can also use proton pump inhibitors. You can use central suppressants. You can also do non-pharmacological, like distracting the patient and suddenly causing the diaphragm to go back to normal contractions and stop the hiccups. So that is all in terms, but my main purpose was to highlight to you that A, respiratory conditions need integration with palliative care. Please don't wait till your patient is really at the end of life to introduce palliative care. You must introduce palliative care in at a time when you can make a difference in the patient quality of life as well as the caregivers support and burden. And breathlessness, when it's beyond all the optimum pharmacological treatment, can be very, very distressing to the patient and caregivers, and it's extremely frustrating. And for that, morphine can really be used safely and judiciously so that we can improve small, give patients small pleasures of life, which is actually it's joyful to treat them even if we know the patient is going to die, but at least we know that patient will die comfortably, or in terminal breathlessness, patients will transition with dignity and respect, especially if they have given a consent of not wanting to go to hospital and not wanting to go through aggressive treatment. So very, very important. Sunil, can we take the questions and then discuss the chat so that people who have
Yeah.
already asked the questions? I think there was something about morphine and COVID.
Yeah. Yeah. So
Should morphine be used?
can morphine
Yes.
be given for a patient?
Absolutely. So we actually, Pallium India has created a task force called Pali COVID Kerala. And through that, we have come out with an e-book of how to manage COVID and everything around COVID through a palliative care lens. Yes, COVID, interstitial lung disease, and COVID pneumonia fits into the criteria of using morphine because patient is already on oxygen, ventilator, BiPAP, steroids, remdesivir, tocilizumab, and still very, very breathless. These patients have a lot of fear, anxiety, guilt, isolation, loneliness, and morphine the same way makes really the patient much more comfortable, and the patient is critical when the patient dies in much better peace and struggles much less than without morphine. So there is a definitive role. If Sunil is okay to share the ebook with all of you, or the algorithm of breathlessness which we use in COVID, there it is. Rajalakshmi has already shared it with all of you. Please go through this extremely important document that has been made by Pallium India and the Pali COVID task force. Then there's another question. I think I
What
have not, I cannot
which
see.
bronchodilator will you prefer in normal situation and in terminal care?
So what is normal situation? We will not use bronchodilators in any normal situation. We will use only for breathless patients. So breathlessness, we will use, it depends on the diagnosis. So if it is asthma and it's a younger patient, then it is a beta 2 agonist, and it is long acting beta 2 agonist like formoterol, salmeterol along with steroids. If the diagnosis is COPD, then the role of muscarinic inhalers come, like ipratropium and tiotropium. We use, so if you follow the two guidelines for managing of asthma and COPD, which is the GINA guidelines for asthma, there's a step ladder treatment, and the gold criteria for COPD. These show typically stepwise management of breathlessness. So you know exactly PFT values, patient's values, which inhaler to use. Second step, third step, fourth step. Similarly, the gold criteria for managing COPD. So in patients who are palliative, we do not stop the original medications. Patients are already on the optimum, we continue that. In addition to that, we do counseling, we do physiotherapy, we do morphine, and therefore morphine is added to the original list for control of breathlessness. So please remember, your pathophysiology dictates the treatment, and that treatment doesn't stop when the patient is chronically breathless. I hope that answers the question. I don't know who asked it because I cannot see the question. Sunil,
That
what's the
is
next question?
That is Dr. Chedan asked on what day of illness would you ask for HRCT in a COVID patient? When would
So
you repeat it?
when you have a COVID positive report, RT-PCR positive, there is no need to do a CT on day one. RT-PCR has diagnosed that the patient has COVID. If the patient has mild to moderate COVID and if the patient is in home quarantine, you start the simple treatment of hydration, checking parameters, paracetamol. Now there is recommendation for Budecort inhaler twice a day. Other than that, there is nothing to be done. If the patient has all symptoms of COVID and RT-PCR has come negative on day 1 and day 5 and 7, you need a CT to diagnose COVID. Otherwise, being in such an infectious virus, sending an RT-PCR positive patient to a CT scan is criminal. You're spreading the virus. So there is no need for RT-PCR CT. If the patient is mild to moderate and remains home, remains well, after 14 days, there is still no need to do any CT. Only if the patient's condition deteriorates or his oxygen level falls is when you do a CT scan. And there is no point of repeating CT scans every 4 days. You will see nothing. And CT score of 8, CT score of 20 doesn't mean the patient has got mild or severe disease. Please remember that a CT score of less in an 80-year-old is still critical, and a CT scan of 20 in a 30-year-old or in a doubly vaccinated patient may not be critical. So please don't see the patients, do not see reports, and do not get carried away by reports saying, oh, this is mild. There's nothing like mild COVID and moderate COVID on CT. If the CT is done, it should be done only if the patient is deteriorating. So that is very, very important. We are unnecessarily using CT and it is dangerous to do unnecessary CT. Second, we don't get any information. It doesn't change the treatment. So because it's a viral, it's a cytokine storm and it's an immune response, we have to be patient and wait and watch for the body to respond to the treatments we are offering. Next question.
So there's a question in connection with that. Do we need to do CT in a young patient around 31 on 16th day if a patient has a spike of fever and RT-PCR is still positive?
So first of all, there is no business of repeating RT-PCR. ICMR, WHO has said that there is no need to repeat RT-PCR because even a dead virion will give you PCR positivity. So RT-PCR, anyway, the infectability of the virus, the transmissibility and the contagiousness is already dropped after day 10. So doing RT-PCR is a waste of time and resources in a country like India. But if the patient has had a spike and respiratory symptoms and a drop of oxygen, then you should do CT scan. But this spike could be some other fever, na? It's not always COVID. So please remember that if a patient has recovered 16th day is recovered from COVID, and again if he develops fever, it could be UTI, it could be malaria, it could be dengue, it could be thrombophlebitis that he's got in the hospital. So please don't keep doing this RT-PCR and please don't do CT at the drop of a hat. Please use your clinical judgment. Do we need to give DEXA to patients who have COVID pneumonia or chest X-ray? But saturation is good. DEXA should not be used for patients whose saturation is good. So DEXA should be used in the ICU. It improves survival. It should not be just popped in at home. Please don't. Only if there's a drop in saturation, you should consider DEXA and Clexane, and this should be given intravenous, ideally methylpred, to actually give you a difference. So just don't pop the steroids. Please let the doctors treat.
So how do
Uh,
we treat aspiration pneumonia in palliative care patients?
So it depends again on the cause. So you have to have first full conversations with the patient if possible and with the caregivers, because if the patient's treatment is incurable, you should treat the patient's fever You should treat the patients with antibiotics so that the fever comes less. That is, of course, if the patient and the family are okay with the aggressive treatment. You can give hyoscine or glycopyrrolate to decrease the secretions and just keep the patient comfortable. See, the motto in palliative care is patient comfort, not why fever, who fever, when fever, which fever. You don't keep investigating in that direction because you know that's an incurable condition that has caused aspiration. So suppose you have a patient of Parkinson's, or suppose you have a patient of progressive supranuclear palsy. He is going to aspirate. You treat one, he'll aspirate a second time. He'll aspirate a third time. So what are you going to do? Therefore, conversations is important. Communications is important. Documentation is important. And with the patient and the caregivers, reach a shared decision of keeping the patient comfortable. So what does that mean? If the patient has fever, treat the fever. If the patient has nausea, treat the nausea. If the patient is breathless, treat the breathlessness. If it needs oxygen, morphine, if the patient says, if the patient wants to do hospitalization, then you can think of antibiotics. But if a patient has an incurable condition which leads to recurrent aspiration, it really doesn't make sense to keep admitting him and keep giving him this and also do difficult complicated procedures like PEG. It really doesn't make sense to do it in patients with PSP or very late in patients with motor neuron disease, etc., where they aspirate very frequently. Yes, Sunil, any more question?
Uh, Patients sometimes aspirate, and we see that patient sometimes aspirate, and maybe after that, what should be done in such cases?
Meaning, what
Yeah,
should be done? That is the question.
yeah,
So the point is, like I told you before, now you need to know why the patient, if it's a one-time aspiration,
yeah,
or if the patient is obtunded, or the stroke has caused the aspiration, then you obviously have to treat everything. But suppose a patient has something like MND or a PSP, he's going to keep aspirating, then the approach is different. So it all depends on the individual patients and what they want out of life, whether it is prolonging the life or whether it is whether you need to give comfort care. In comfort care, we only treat the symptoms. We do nothing else aggressively as far as patient is comfortable.
Excuse me, ma'am.
Yeah.
Can How long can we give hyoscine or
So
glycopyrrolate
that's
for
what I said,
aspiration?
na Sheila. I said very clearly you need to use it on need basis. You can start it on SOS because you don't want the patient to be too dry. So you give small doses. You can first try. So I have a patient, for example, who has PSP. So I give it to her. I say once a day. Sometimes it's half a tablet a day. Sometimes it's half a tablet twice a day. So it's every day you need to gauge, because you don't want to make the patient extremely dry because that also is uncomfortable. So it is very individualistic. But what I want you to know is there are drugs available which can be used in different manners so that it can cause comfort to the patient. And that is what we need to learn in palliative care. The pharmacology of these medications we need to understand fully because in some small doses it can actually benefit and control certain distressing symptoms. So there is no blanket rule that you must give this much. It depends on how much secretions the patient has and how comfortable the patient is.
Ma'am,
so yeah,
so can I ask
go
one
on.
more also?
Yeah,
Ma'am, so according to your session, even morphine can be used for cough, for intractable cough. It helps in cough also.
Yes, 100%. So we use cough for patients who have interstitial lung disease cough. They're already on antifibrotics. They're already on all their physiotherapy. They're counseled, and still, if they have cough which disturbs their sleep, we do give them first codeine. Codeine is a weak opioid, and if it doesn't settle, we escalate it to morphine in the same protocol like we escalate for breathlessness.
Okay, thank you.
can morphine be given for a patient with reactive airway disease, considering the chance of histamine release?
No, so the point is, Sunil, we never stop the bronchodilators. So all the other optimum treatments are going on. It's the treatment of the chronic respiratory, and the doses we give for the chronic breathlessness is so small that it doesn't worsen the airway condition. It doesn't cause bronchospasm.
Okay. Do you have experience in using noscapine tablet in intractable cough?
Sorry, what tablet?
Noscapine.
No, I haven't ever used it. Sorry, I don't have any, but I'm happy to learn about it.
Okay. So what are the protocols for assessing the status of lungs in a patient who has recovered after severe COVID pneumonia?
Oh, that's a good question. So now we have, I don't know if I have shared that post-COVID document with Arun. I'm happy to share it with him when the case presentation is going on with you, Arun or Lajalakshmi. You can share it with this group. The important things that you need to know after a person is recovered from COVID pneumonia is, first of all, oxygen requirement. He needs physiotherapy focused with a respiratory physiotherapist like a pulmonary rehab. 1 month after the COVID pneumonia, he should try and do a lung function test, pulmonary function test with DLCO, which is the diffusion capacity of lung for carbon monoxide, and a 6-minute walk test. This is 1 month after the COVID. If this show a very significant restriction suggestive of interstitial lung disease, because that's what COVID pneumonia leaves, is the fibrosis, then we can do an HRCT to evaluate the baseline of the post-COVID, and we need to put him on antifibrotics. So now we have started using a lot of patients who have this severe COVID pneumonia. We started using antifibrotics in the ICU itself, which is pirfenidone and nintedanib. These are the antifibrotics we are using, so that in hope that the lung does not get fibrosed. There is a lot of literature to suggest that the post-COVID pneumonia, which heals by fibrosis, usually settles in patients in 10 to 12 weeks. So it is an aggressive 10 to 12 week rehab, physio, breathing exercises, oxygen, sometimes BiPAP, along with antifibrotics. Quite a few patients take about 10 to 12 weeks to recover from this. So
you use antifibrotic during the hospitalization itself,
So
ma'am?
if there's a severe pneumonia and the patient is in ICU, we start the antifibrotics along with, see, the Clexane, the tocilizumab, remdesivir, all the acute phases is getting over. As the pneumonia heals by fibrosis, we start the patient on nintedanib or pirfenidone.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you, sir.
Any more questions?
Any more questions?
We can go for the case presentation.
Yeah. Okay. So today's patient story will be presented by Dr. Nibun Lamba. Dr. Nibun.
Yes, sir. Good afternoon, sir. Good afternoon, respected faculty members. Next slide, please. Today, we are going to discuss a case of 62 years old male who was having a carcinoma lung with metastasis. Next slide, please. The presenting complaints of patient was he came to us with difficulty in breathing, which was continuing for about 6 to 7 months, but it has aggravated since 15 days. He was also having pain in anterior aspect of chest, which was also aggravated from past 15 days. Earlier, he was having continuous pain, but it was relieved by tramadol tablets at home. He was also having pain in neck and upper back from 10 days, and he was also having complaints of cough and generalized weakness. Next slide, please. Patient was apparently all right 8 months back. Then he developed difficulty in breathing, which was aggravated while walking and doing strenuous work. Patient underwent treatment from a doctor nearby, but was not relieved. He was advised further investigations from the doctor, and he had undergone X-ray chest, CT chest, and routine blood investigations. Later on, he was diagnosed as stage 4 carcinoma of lung. Gradually, he developed pain on anterior aspect of chest, which was radiating towards back, and upper aspect of neck also. The patient was a chronic smoker. He was smoking about 1 bundle per day for the last 20 years. Next slide, please. On examination, the patient was conscious and oriented. His pulse was about 98 per minute. His BP was 116 by 84 millimeters of mercury. On auscultation, there was decreased air entry on right side. Clefts and bronchi were present. The diagnosis was confirmed by histopathological report, and the final diagnosis was arrived to be carcinoma lung. Next slide. The patient has also undergone CT of lung and PET scan and all the routine blood investigations. He was referred from oncology department to undergo palliative care. The patient has undergone 1 session of chemotherapy. The patient's son and his daughter-in-law both work as nursing staff in our hospital only. So they understood the progression of the disease and they refused for further treatment, and they agreed for only palliative care treatment in this patient. He was started on morphine 10 milligram 4 hourly and gabapentin 300 milligram at night. He was also prescribed ibuprofen and paracetamol twice a day, along with cough syrup, and he was also advised a nebulizer machine at home, so that if in case of respiratory distress, they can nebulize him at home. And medications like aceclofenac was also started. Emotional support and counseling of the patient was done. Next slide. The patient was distressed because of his physical symptoms. He was having breathlessness, he was having continuous cough and pain. He feels that his son and daughter-in-law, both nursing staff who were working in our hospital, he felt that they had not taken good care of him. He believes that he was left alone. He's not worried about his family because his kids are settled, and he believes that he has done his part. Next slide, please. He had undergone only 1 session of chemotherapy, presently not on any curative medicines, and his family has also refused for further treatment looking at the advanced nature of his illness. And he's taking morphine, gabapentin, ibuprofen, and because for constipation, lactulose and Dulcolax. He's also taking omeprazole tablets, empty stomach, and Decazole. Next slide, please. Pain is the main concern for patient and his family. The pain patient was having was of very severe intensity. On numerical rating score, it was about 7 to 8, and the patient usually wakes up with severe pain in night as told by the family, and patient was also worried that he's getting more and more dependent on his family. Earlier he used to do all his work on himself, but now because of his pain, because of his breathlessness, because of his cough, he's more dependent on his family for his day-to-day activities. Sometimes the patient has episode of dullness and he is not arousable, but after some times he wakes up, and sometimes the patient becomes hyperactive in the house. It was told by his daughter-in-law. As patient's son and daughter-in-law both are nursing staff in our hospital, they were concerned that his illness will get worse as the time passes, and they will be unable to help him because they have refused the further treatment. So they were having sometimes second thought in their mind that should we go for chemotherapy or radiotherapy. Next slide. Somebody states that the now 68-year-old male with CA lung came for palliative and supportive care. He's having complaints of breathlessness, pain, and generalized weakness, and family doesn't want to undergo further treatment because of advanced nature of his illness. Okay. So the discussion points from this case is what we can do to make his breathlessness and pain better. How can we improve breathlessness in this patient? And does the family need to be counseled for further treatment options like palliative chemotherapy or radiotherapy? Or should we um, stop now chemotherapy and radiotherapy and just undergo palliative treatment. Thank
Thank you, Dr. Nipun. So anybody has any comments? I think there is some clarification. Was there a refusal of chemotherapy?
Yes, the patient has refused chemotherapy. The patient relatives have actually refused for chemotherapy and radiation therapy. The patient was not knowing his treatment options. He was from a rural background, but his son and his daughter-in-law, they were aware of the treatment options, but they refused. That was the reason he was feeling that his son and daughter-in-law not taking enough care of him.
So Nipun, you were there yesterday also for the talk on
Yes,
medical ethics. So
Yes,
is
ma'am.
it right that the son and daughter decide for the man?
Yes, ma'am. They have decided for him.
Is it right?
No, ma'am, it is not actually right.
So
We have
ideally,
counseled them for
what in an ideal world the patient should decide, or the patient and the family members together should decide. But you can't decide on what happens to the patient without the patient. That is a bit
Yes,
criminal.
ma'am.
So I think that is the
Yes,
first
ma'am.
thing. Agreed that the patients probably they have decided right, but the patient should also realize that what is being done is in his best interest, and that should come from his. It has to be his call. So this is actually
Ma'am,
a very
the
yeah.
irony is that they even hadn't told the patient. The patient is still alive, ma'am, and they haven't told the patient that he's having carcinoma of lung. They
And
just
the
told
patient
him that he's having.
experiences the illness, the heaviness, the breathlessness, the chest pain, so many things, and obviously his mind is confused, and actually the patient is feeling betrayed that his own people are not telling him, leave alone the doctors. It is our medical ethically, it is our duty to tell him he's our patient, he's the
Yes,
focus of
ma'am.
our care. So it has to be incorporated in all training of doctors that autonomy is very, very important. It is the patient's right to know. And please remember, tomorrow we are going to be in a position. Our parents might be in this position. And we should empower them with that information, because the what they decision they make, it is guilt free for the family then we can at least be sure that patient has understood the full situation and still and refuses treatment. It is his body, his right, his choice. So this is very medically ethically wrong that the son and daughter have decided. Now there could be other reasons why the son and daughter have decided. Maybe they don't have money, maybe they don't have people to care for him after chemotherapy. After giving chemotherapy so many side effects, they are probably not able to sit at home and look after him. So there might be multiple reasons which we should explore, because if it is finances, we can get social worker. If it is caregiving problems, we can find out volunteers to sit with the patient so that the son and the daughter can go to work, because multiple causes can make the family decide that we don't want to treat this patient further. First of all, it has to be the patient's decision. You have to explore the reasons why the patient and the relatives are saying no. I also saw
Ma'am,
a question from Shanti saying, is it correct to refuse chemo? So basically, there's nothing black and white. It depends on the stage of the patient, it depends on the stage of the disease, it depends on the ECOG criteria, how good the patient's general condition is. And if he doesn't want to, it is our duty to explain that in a patient where there is possibility of improvement of the illness, he should try chemo. But still, if the patient refuses, after understanding, then it is his decision. We cannot force anybody to take chemo. So that is very important. And also the Supreme Court judgment says the right to refuse treatment is the patient's. It is the patient's life, patient's body. It has to be the patient's decision. So I think it's extremely important to remember that. So medical ethics is important. The judgment of March 2018, to understand that is important. And for that, you really need to have excellent communication skills. And that is something that you need to practice, 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 because in all difficult situations, it's only your words that will help you actually come out of sticky situations. So it is your duties towards the patient. So if the family
ma'am,
members have refused, you really need to find out how. And how will you
Ma'am,
improve the
actually, the
breathlessness?
point-
You already know how to improve the breathlessness. Yes,
Ma'am, the
Nipun.
points you are stating were very true. The same were the reasons they have refused the treatment along with his advanced illness. Definitely, the patient had metastasis. He was in stage 4. But his son and his daughter-in-law, they both were very concerned that they will be drained financially and they both have to come to work. There was nobody to look after him when they are on job. His father used to live in village, and if he comes to stay with them permanently, then they have to, one of them has to stay home to look after him.
Exactly. So that is,
So-
these are all social issues, so these can be solved. Like if you have, like, for example, Delhi has cancer support, Kerala has Pallium India. They can, if you reach out to these people. But having said that, metastatic lung cancer has a very poor prognosis. So in one sense,
Yes.
probably the decision is right. But still, it is
Yes.
very, very important to keep the patient comfortable. That they cannot deny. About the morphine, about the palliative care, about no aggressive treatment, no CPR. Those conversations we should still have. Just because the patient is metastatic cancer, and very often doctors in India say, sorry, we cannot do anything now, is wrong. We have everything to do in our bag to keep him comfortable. And that we should not forget. And that is the role of palliative care. And unfortunately, what happens now is only when the patient reaches the stage where nothing curative can be done, they dump it to palliative care. That should not happen. That integration should come earlier, because we need to form a rapport with the patient. Why should the patient trust me 2 days before he's dying? He's not going to trust me. He needs to see me a little bit more. So, therefore, early integration of palliative care is important, even in an incurable stage, because at least we can make the patient comfortable, independent, happy, and live whatever days or weeks of his life in a manner which is of respect and dignity. So, that is very important. All of you, therefore, should have and wear the palliative care hat at appropriate times in the trajectory of your patient's illnesses. It cannot be wait till the end of life. Involve palliative care early, make a team, shared care, let there be a rapport, let there be a continuism of care, and let the patient have a good care experience, even if he's poor. It should, bank balance should not decide the quality of care. So it's very important, therefore, to realize that we must focus on the human being, not the lung cancer. So respect his decision, support him, look after the family members, and see to that all times the least you can do is keep your patients comfortable.
Can
Anything
the
So-
dose of
else?
morphine be increased in this patient? Because they said for sometimes he's dull, but other times he's active, and the pain seems to be still not under control. So what can we do for this patient?
So
both
there are
the
many
pain?
things. See, this pain might not be just the physical pain. It could be
That's true.
my son is not treating me.
Yeah,
I
yeah,
have
that's
raised
true.
my son, and look what he's giving me in return. Why has this happened to me? I'm not even smoked a cigarette. So many things can be there. So I think a counselor involvement
Yes,
is
ma'am.
important. So you assess the physical pain, but I'm sure there are other things. For example, he's probably feeling uprooted from the village. In an urban area, he's lost. He doesn't have people to talk to. His son and daughter-in-law leave and go. So many things can be bothering him. And that's the reason where an integrated palliative care can help explain these things and at least help him come to terms with the situation.
So we have a
Yes, ma'am.
oncologist
Thank you, ma'am.
in our group, Dr. Anisha. Can you comment on this patient, whether she would be benefiting with chemotherapy or radiotherapy?
Yeah, actually, even in stage 4 CA lung, it is chemotherapy as well as radiation is trials have shown that it prolongs survival and also symptom free, because stage 4 lung is a definitely a bad prognostic malignancy. But the problem is if we doesn't treat the patient with either palliative chemotherapy or radiotherapy, definitely his disease will progress. There is a limit for symptom management. So I think he should have continued the palliative chemotherapy as well as radiotherapy. If he can't afford the treatment there, he should have been sent to a government center where this treatment he would have got free. That is the main, especially bone metastasis and all, radiation plays a vital role in controlling symptoms, and as reduces the fracture risk, its quality of life can also be improved. But this
Agreed.
case, the bystanders are not a bit
Agreed.
enthusiastic.
That's what we say. I think we should explain to the patient. We have to
Yes.
take and see to that he understands, and then see what he does, and try to cajole him that maybe by doing this, at least the pain will decrease. So palliative radio, palliative chemo, but it's still, you need the social worker if finances are the problem. 100% it'll, palliative radiotherapy does benefit bone metastasis. What else can we give for breathlessness in terms of medical management? You mean after morphine? Well, there are other doses of morphine that you can give. You can give methadone, which Sunil is a master of. But essentially, a strong opioid is what you can give after you have tried all the other medications. So this is really the last resort. Sunil, you want to add to that?
One point also. I think,
yeah.
in
Yeah.
case of in palliative chemotherapy, we have seen patients symptom-free with the palliative chemotherapy dose, because the disease, malignant effusion, everything will resolve with chemo, because the disease will shrunk. So I think this was a situation which happened here, because the disease is progressing, because he's not taking any palliative chemo or radiation. So there is a limit for symptom care, because once we are not at all addressing the disease, definitely there is a limit. I think every decision should be taken based on the clinical judgment, whether he can tolerate chemotherapy, radiotherapy, everything should be a clinical judgment. But continue with the palliative symptom management, he must have continued with chemo and radiation. That's why. Otherwise, there is a
Because-
limit in controlling breathlessness and every other symptoms, I think.
Because palliative care is not just physical symptoms, right? It does control the other symptoms. So the patient is also not feels supported and not abandoned. So other issues of his life are also addressed, which is also important. It is not just the lung cancer, but other issues also. And obviously the side effects of the palliative chemo, the radio, all that also gets addressed by palliative care physicians.
Yes.
This patient, where was the metastasis actually?
I think it was in the bone.
It was
Skeletal.
bone,
Dr.
which is why
Nibu?
Anisha said that you should do palliative radio. It really does make a difference. Besides other things, in fact, morphine for bone metastasis will not help. You probably need bisphosphonates and calcium and palliative radio, which will help the bone mets. So clearly, it is education of the relatives and the information to the patient.
So if this patient is having pain as well as breathlessness.
Yes.
If the patient doesn't have any symptoms of toxicities of opioids, you can actually try to increase the dose of morphine and see whether the breathlessness is responding. It may give some more relief for the breathlessness, and the non-pharmacological management can also be tried. Dr. Rajan was talking about a handheld fan, which can be beneficial for the patient to relieve the breathlessness. And this patient is emotionally very low, and I think we need to explore more about the psychological status, and if he has any depression or anxiety. So Dr. Rajan is talking about anxiety. So if he is getting panic attacks, then benzodiazepines like lorazepam sublingually 0.5 to 1 milligram would be beneficial for the patient. If he has anxiety, then if he has chronic anxiety, then treatment with SSRIs would be beneficial, or even if the patient has depression. And you told that this patient is hyperactive. Why the patient is hyperactive sometimes? Any idea?
Sorry?
No, Dr. Nibun was telling that this patient is hyperactive sometimes. So what was the reason for his hyperactivity?
I don't know exactly the reason of hyperactivity, but his daughter-in-law stated that in night sometime he wakes up and he just moves around and start doing all sorts of work and moving around the house and in the veranda. He was moving outside the house, and he feels like he's completely cured. And then again he went after some time into a
So he
phase where he
definitely
was
needs some counseling and some psychological interventions. You know, I think he wants to believe he's normal.
Uh, yeah. And also, I think we need to assess is he in delirium also?
Yeah,
I'm
correct.
not sure, but we have to think in that terms of also.
Yeah. So I have
Uh,
forwarded some articles which I think Rajlakshmi has already sent it to all of you. Those are useful. One is for COVID, one is for breathlessness, one is post-COVID management, and one is respiratory diseases and COVID and palliative care. So I hope those are useful to you. Anything else, Sunil?
no, we had about chronic breathlessness syndrome and the importance of treating breathlessness not only in cancer patients but also in many other non-chronic diseases. And there are many patients who have interstitial lung disease or refractory COPDs, where we can actually improve the quality of life of patients by simply prescribing low dose of morphine, which will definitely help in reducing the sensation of breathlessness, as well as it will reduce the hypercarbic response to the hypercarbic response and thereby reducing the work of breathing. Um, and it can, morphine actually also has a property of reducing anxiety. So it will also contribute in that way. Uh, so in this patient, actually there should have been an open discussion with the patient and family. And then actually the family can actually tell the patient, okay, these are the problems that we are facing as of now. What do you think? So that kind of discussion should take place within the family. And this patient is going from hospital to hospital, and he is receiving many treatments, but he don't know what happens to him or what is happening to him. So that can also increase the anxiety of the patient. So all this can contribute to the both pain as well as to the breathlessness. So giving proper information is very, very important. And we also talked about morphine or other strong opiates for treating breathlessness, and the importance of radiotherapy for bone metastasis. So thank you all. Thank you, Dr. Rajam, for
Thank you.
the wonderful session.
Thank you
And
so much.
thank you, Dr. Nibul, for a very good patient story, which is very suitable for this session.
Thank
Thank
you,
you all for
Nipun.
your active participation.